The gavel slammed, and the courtroom froze. A young black woman stood alone at the defendant's table, her chin high, eyes locked on the judge. This wasn't just a trial, it was a trap, and she was about to turn it upside down. Amara Tate, 28, had walked into the small-town courthouse in Eldridge, Alabama, expecting a routine day. She'd come to this quiet corner of the South on assignment, blending into the community as part of her cover. But now, she stood accused of theft, framed by a local store owner who'd sneered at her skin color the moment she entered his shop. The charge was flimsy, built on lies, but the judge, Harold Grayson, didn't care about evidence. His reputation preceded him, a man who'd built his career on bias, his rulings a quiet weapon against anyone who didn't look like him. Amara had known men like him her whole life. She wasn't here to beg, she was here to fight. The morning had started innocently enough. Amara, posing as a freelance writer researching small-town economies, had visited Eldridge's only hardware store to interview the owner, Carl Whitaker. She'd asked about local business trends, her notebook open, her demeanor professional. But Carl's eyes had lingered too long on her dark skin, her braided hair, her confident posture. "You don't belong here," he'd muttered under his breath, loud enough for her to hear. Amara had ignored it, used to the sting of such words. She'd pressed on with her questions until Carl, flustered by her persistence, accused her of stealing a $20 wrench from the counter. She hadn't touched it. The wrench was found in her bag, planted, she knew, the moment Carl had stepped into the back room. By noon, Amara was in cuffs, hauled to the county jail. The speed of it all was dizzying, orchestrated. Carl's word was enough for the local police, who didn't bother with security footage or witnesses. They saw her skin, heard his story, and decided justice was already served. Amara didn't panic. She'd been trained for worse. As an FBI agent working undercover to investigate corruption in small-town judicial systems, she knew how to play the long game. Eldridge was her target, and Judge Grayson was the linchpin. His history of disproportionate sentencing against black defendants had flagged him on the Bureau's radar. Amara's job was to gather evidence of his bias. Now, she was living it. The courtroom was a pressure cooker by the time the trial began. Grayson sat high on his bench, his thin lips curled into a permanent scowl. The prosecution, a nervous young attorney named Paul Dorsey, fumbled through his opening, parroting Carl's story with rehearsed conviction. Amara's public defender, a weary woman named Linda Hayes, did her best, but she was outmatched. The deck was stacked. Grayson's courtroom was his kingdom, and he ruled with an iron gavel. "Young lady," Grayson began, his voice dripping with condescension as he addressed Amara, "this court doesn't tolerate thieves. You came into our town, thinking you could take what's not yours. I've seen your kind before." The words landed like a slap, and murmurs rippled through the gallery. Amara's jaw tightened, but she held his gaze. She could feel the weight of every eye in the room, some curious, some hostile, all waiting for her to crumble. She wouldn't. The prosecution's case was a house of cards. Carl took the stand, spinning a tale of Amara sneaking around his store, his testimony laced with coded language. "She didn't look like she belonged," he said, glancing at the all-white jury. "I knew she was trouble." Amara's defender tried to poke holes, pointing out the lack of footage or receipts, but Grayson shut her down, sustaining every objection from Dorsey. The jury, hand-picked from Eldridge's insular community, nodded along, their faces blank but their biases clear. Amara's turn came. She stood, her voice steady, and recounted her version: the interview, Carl's hostility, the planted wrench. She spoke clearly, her words measured, but Grayson cut her off mid-sentence. "That's enough," he snapped. "I've heard all I need." He leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. "You're not from here. You don't understand our ways. This court finds you guilty." The gavel hovered, ready to seal her fate. The room held its breath. Amara's heart pounded, not from fear but from the fire building inside her. She'd spent years training for moments like this, moments when the system bared its teeth, daring her to bite back. She'd grown up in a Chicago neighborhood where cops profiled her brothers, where teachers dismissed her potential, where every step forward demanded 10 times the effort of her white peers. She'd clawed her way into the FBI, earning her badge through grit and brilliance. Now, in this courtroom, she wasn't just Amara Tate, defendant. She was Agent Tate, and she was done playing their game. "Your Honor," Amara said, her voice cutting through the silence like a blade. "Before you sentence me, there's something you need to know." Grayson's gavel paused, his brow furrowing. The gallery leaned forward, sensing a shift. Amara reached into her blazer, pulling out a slim leather wallet. She flipped it open, revealing the gold badge that gleamed under the courtroom lights. "I'm Special Agent Amara Tate, Federal Bureau of Investigation. And this trial? It's over." Gasps erupted. Dorsey's jaw dropped, his papers slipping to the floor. Linda Hayes stared, wide-eyed, as if seeing Amara for the first time. Carl Whitaker shifted in his seat, his face paling. Grayson's scowl deepened, but a flicker of unease crossed his eyes. "This is preposterous," he barked. "You expect me to believe?" "Check the badge," Amara interrupted, her tone calm but unyielding. She slid it across the table toward the bailiff, who hesitated before picking it up. The room buzzed as he examined it, then nodded to Grayson. The judge's face reddened, his authority unraveling. Amara pressed on. "I've been investigating you, Judge Grayson, for judicial misconduct. Your sentencing patterns show a clear bias against black defendants, disproportionate convictions, harsher penalties. The Bureau has been watching for months." The gallery exploded. Spectators whispered, some shouting in disbelief. A woman in the back row, an older black resident who'd seen Grayson's rulings ruin lives, clapped her hands, tears streaming down her face. Dorsey stammered, trying to object, but Grayson silenced him with a glare. "Order," he bellowed, slamming his gavel. But the room was beyond his control now. Amara didn't flinch. "You rushed this trial," she said, her voice rising. "You ignored evidence, dismissed my defense, and convicted me on Carl Whitaker's word alone. Why? Because I'm black. Because you thought I was powerless. But you're wrong." She turned to the jury, her eyes fierce. "This isn't just about me. It's about every person you've wronged, every life you've shattered with your prejudice." Grayson's face was a mask of fury, but his hands trembled. "You're out of line," he growled. This court is corrupt," Amara cut in. "And I have proof." She pulled a small recorder from her pocket, holding it up. "Every word in this room is on tape. Your rulings, your comments, your bias, it's all documented. The FBI has been building a case, and this trial is the final nail." She turned to Carl, who was shrinking in his seat. "And you, Mr. Whitaker? Planting evidence? That's a federal offense. You'll be hearing from us." The courtroom descended into pandemonium. The bailiff moved toward Amara, but Linda Hayes stepped in, her shock replaced by resolve. "Don't touch her," she said, her voice firm. "She's telling the truth." The jury shifted uncomfortably, some avoiding Amara's gaze, others glaring at Grayson. The older black woman in the gallery stood, shouting, "It's about time." Others joined her, their voices a chorus of pent-up anger. Grayson pounded his gavel, his face purple. "This is my courtroom," he roared. But his words were hollow. Amara stood tall, the badge in her hand a symbol of everything he'd underestimated. She'd come to Eldridge to expose him, and now, in front of the town he'd ruled with an iron fist, she'd done it. The aftermath was swift. Federal agents entered the courtroom, summoned by Amara's team, who'd been monitoring the trial from a distance. Grayson was escorted out, his protests drowned by the crowd's murmurs. Carl Whitaker was detained, his stammered excuses ignored. The jury was dismissed, their faces a mix of shame and disbelief. Amara's recorder was handed over to her supervisor, a stern woman who'd mentored her through the academy. "Good work, Tate," she said, her voice low but proud. Amara stepped outside the courthouse, the Alabama sun warm on her face. The older woman from the gallery approached, her eyes shining. "I've lived here 40 years, she said. "Never thought I'd see this day." "Thank you." Amara nodded, her throat tight. This wasn't just a win, it was a reckoning. But the fight wasn't over. Grayson's allies in the town would push back. The system he'd built wouldn't crumble in a day. Amara knew the road ahead would be long, but she was ready. She'd faced worse odds and come out stronger. As she walked to her car, badge in hand, she felt the weight of every person who'd been silenced by men like Grayson. She wasn't just an agent. She was a promise that justice, however delayed, would come. As Amara drove away from the courthouse, the weight of the day settled into her bones. The victory was real, but it was only the beginning. Eldridge was a small town, but its problems were a microcosm of a larger fight, one she'd dedicated her life to. Her phone buzzed in the passenger seat, a message from her supervisor: "Tate, report to HQ tomorrow. We've got work to do." She exhaled, knowing the road ahead would demand every ounce of her strength. Grayson's downfall was a crack in the system, but cracks could be patched if she didn't keep pushing. Back in Eldridge, the town was already fracturing. News of the trial spread like wildfire, amplified by local gossip and a few bold posts on X. By evening, the hashtag Eldridge Reckoning was trending, with residents and outsiders alike dissecting the events. Some praised Amara's courage, calling her a hero who'd exposed a rotten core. Others, loyal to Grayson's legacy, doubled down, claiming she'd entrapped an honest judge with her badge and recorder. The divide was stark. Those who'd felt the sting of bias saw justice, those who'd benefited from Grayson's rulings saw betrayal. Amara's team at the FBI was already moving. The recorder wasn't the only evidence. Months of surveillance, interviews with former defendants, and leaked court documents painted a damning picture of Grayson's tenure. He'd sentenced black defendants to jail time at triple the rate of their white counterparts for similar offenses. Minor infractions, like jaywalking or loitering, became felony charges under his gavel if the defendant was black. Amara's case, though orchestrated, was the final piece, a controlled sting to catch him in the act. The Bureau had chosen her not just for her skill but because she could embody the very people Grayson targeted. It was personal for her, and she delivered. The next morning, Amara sat in a Birmingham field office, debriefing with her team. Her supervisor, Agent Carla Monroe, leaned back in her chair, her expression a mix of pride and exhaustion. "You stirred a hornet's nest, Tate," she said. "Grayson's got friends, local politicians, business owners, even a few in the State House. They're circling the wagons." Amara nodded, unsurprised. She'd seen it before, systems protecting their own, even when the rot was exposed. "What's the next move?" she asked. "We're filing federal charges," Monroe replied. "Misconduct, abuse of power, civil rights violations. Whitaker's looking at evidence tampering and perjury. But it's not just them. We're auditing Eldridge's entire judicial system: cops, clerks, prosecutors. Your trial gave us the leverage we needed." Amara's chest tightened with a mix of relief and resolve. This wasn't just about her badge or her mission, it was about the people who'd sat in that courtroom before her, powerless, their lives upended by a man who saw their skin as a crime. Back in Eldridge, the fallout was chaotic. The local paper ran a front-page story: "Judge Grayson ousted in FBI sting." The article quoted Amara's courtroom speech, her badge reveal now the stuff of legend. But it also quoted Carl Whitaker, who doubled down in an interview, claiming he'd been tricked by a city outsider. His supporters rallied, painting Amara as an opportunist who'd used her badge to dodge justice. The hardware store's Yelp page became a battleground, with one-star reviews calling Carl a racist and five-star reviews defending him as a pillar of the community. The town's diner, once a neutral meeting ground, was now splittables divided by those who cheered Amara and those who cursed her name. Amara returned to Eldridge a week later, this time in her official capacity. The Bureau had set up a temporary office in a rented storefront, a base to interview residents and gather more evidence. She walked through town, her badge clipped to her belt, her presence a quiet challenge to those who stared. Some avoided her eyes, others nodded with cautious respect. At the diner, she met with Linda Hayes, her former public defender, who'd become an unexpected ally. "I owe you an apology," Linda said, stirring her coffee. "I should have fought harder in that courtroom. I didn't see its setup, the bias until you flipped the script." Amara shook her head. "You were in an impossible spot. Grayson ran that room like a dictator." Linda sighed, her eyes distant. "I've been here 10 years. I've seen him ruin lives, kids, families, people who didn't deserve it. I kept my head down. Thought that's how you survive." She looked at Amara, her voice firm. "Not anymore." Their conversation was interrupted by a commotion outside. A small crowd had gathered, led by a man in a flannel shirt, Tom Reynolds, a local mechanic and Grayson's cousin. He held a sign, "Justice for Judge Grayson." His group, mostly older white men, shouted about outside agitators ruining their town. Across the street, a smaller group, led by the older black woman from the courtroom, Mrs. Evelyn Carter, held their own signs, "No more bias" and "Amara Tate speaks for us." The tension was palpable, the air thick with unspoken grudges. Amara stepped outside, her badge catching the sunlight. Reynolds spotted her and pointed. "You think you can come here and tear us apart?" he shouted. "Grayson kept this town safe." Evelyn stepped forward, her voice steady. "Safe for who, Tom?" "Not my son, locked up for a broken taillight. Not my neighbor, fined for disturbing the peace because she prayed too loud." The crowd murmured, some nodding, others glaring. Amara raised a hand, silencing the noise. "This isn't about me," she said. "It's about what's right. Grayson broke the law. He targeted people based on their skin. If you defend that, you're defending injustice." Reynolds scoffed, but his group quieted, some shifting uncomfortably. Evelyn's eyes met Amara's, a silent thank you passing between them. The standoff didn't erupt into violence, but it didn't need to. The divide was clear, and Amara knew change wouldn't come easily. Eldridge was a battleground now, not just for Grayson's fate but for the soul of the town. Weeks later, Grayson's trial began in federal court. Amara testified, her recorder's audio played for a jury that wasn't hand-picked by a biased judge. The evidence was overwhelming, years of sentencing data, witness accounts, and Amara's own testimony about the sting. Grayson's defense leaned on his decades of service, but it crumbled under the weight of his actions. Carl Whitaker, facing his own charges, turned state's witness, admitting he'd planted the wrench under pressure from a local cop loyal to Grayson. The cop was arrested the next day. The verdict came swiftly, guilty on multiple counts. Grayson was sentenced to 7 years, his legacy in tatters. The courtroom, packed with Eldridge residents, erupted in mixed reactions. Some cheered, others wept. Amara sat in the back, her face calm but her heart racing. She'd done her job, but the victory felt heavy. Grayson was one man, the system he'd thrived in was still standing. Back in Eldridge, the town began to shift. Linda Hayes took on pro bono cases for those wrongfully convicted under Grayson, working with Amara's team to review old files. Evelyn Carter started a community group, Eldridge United, to advocate for fair policing and judicial reform. The group faced resistance, vandalized signs, anonymous threats, but it grew, drawing in younger residents who'd once felt voiceless. Even Tom Reynolds, after weeks of silence, showed up at a meeting, his face grim but his presence a signal of change. Amara's assignment ended, but she didn't leave Eldridge behind. She returned monthly, checking in with Evelyn, mentoring kids at the community center, and training local activists to hold the system accountable. Her badge, once a tool for her cover, was now a symbol of hope for those who'd seen it flash in that courtroom. She'd exposed a truth that couldn't be buried again. The Eldridge Reckoning hashtag faded, but its impact lingered. X posts still circulated, some calling for more investigations, others decrying woke justice. Amara read them late at night, her phone glowing in her apartment. The debate was messy, but it was alive. People were talking about race, about power, about what justice meant in a town like Eldridge and beyond. As Amara prepared for her next assignment, she thought of her mother, who'd raised her to fight despite the odds. "They'll try to break you," she'd said. "Don't let them." Amara hadn't. She'd faced Grayson's gavel, Carl's lies, and a town's divided heart, and she'd come out stronger. Eldridge wasn't healed, but it was awake. And that was enough for now. What do you think? Where does justice begin, and how do we bridge a community's divide?